was noteworthy. So let me read this to you. I like Steve, but you have to remember he was not involved in my campaign until very late. I had already beaten all of the senators and all of the governors, and I didn't know Steve. I'm my own strategist, and it wasn't like I was going to change strategies because I was facing crooked Hillary. Steve is a good guy, but I told them to straighten it out or I will. Damning with faint praise.
There's no loyalty in this administration unless you are like a blood relative of Donald Trump. Because, I remember, most of us remember, it was Steve Bannon and Kellyanne Conway, when they came onto the campaign, that's when his campaign straightened up. For President Trump to say, oh, well, I didn't really like Steve. No, Steve Bannon helped save your campaign. So for him to turn around now and say, I don't want anything to do with the guy. And here's the thing. I've always thought the president can pick who they want for their administration, but Steve Bannon is a problem. He's a white nationalist. He sympathizes with white terrorist organizations. He's an anti-Semite. I don't think he had a role in this administration, but the idea is that Trump's only unhappy because he's making him look bad, not because of the ideology he brings to the administration.
The reality is he going to go anywhere? Let's see. I'm a seller on that proposition.
Panel, thank you very much. There's more news. The president warning North Korea an armada is headed to the region. Pyongyang threatening a nuclear strike if they're provoked. What will happen next? We take you live inside North Korea.
All right, so President Trump saying he's sending an armada to the region as a show of strength, the region around North Korea. Now, the North is warning of a nuclear strike if provoked. All this leading to an urgent phone call between President Trump and the Chinese president. CNN's Will Ripley live in Pyongyang, North Korea with more. Will, the state of play.
The state of play is that state media here in North Korea has yet to respond to President Trump's tweets or this new interview that has come out where he's talking about the flotilla of U.S. warships that are getting closer to the Korean Peninsula. This is the first time now that China seems to be indicating a willingness to take stronger economic action against North Korea if they do something provocative like a sixth nuclear test, which analysts believe could happen at any time. There was this new phone call between President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. It's the first time the Chinese government has actually officially acknowledged that the two presidents spoke about North Korea. And a state-run newspaper in China is saying that the Chinese public are getting fed up with the tension on the Korean Peninsula. President Trump speaking about the Armada heading towards the Korean Peninsula. This is the Carl Vinson Strike Group with 60 planes, a 97,000-ton aircraft carrier, and nuclear weapons. Listen.
We are sending an Armada, very powerful. We have submarines, very powerful, far more powerful than the aircraft carrier, that I can tell you. And we have the best military people on earth. And I will say this, he is doing the wrong thing.
President Trump alluding to the fact that submarines are capable of launching nuclear missiles, a direct threat to North Korea. How they will respond yet to be determined. We also know that Japan is making preparations to possibly evacuate its citizens from the Korean Peninsula if things get out of hand. Also, Japan sending warships to join the Carl Vinson Strike Group. This could really agitate the North Koreans because Japan, before World War II, occupied the Korean Peninsula. But Allison, right now, we just don't know how Kim Jong-un will respond as North Korea prepares for one of its biggest holidays of the year on Saturday.
Will, thank you for being in Pyongyang for us and all of that new reporting. Meanwhile, back here at home, United Airlines facing a viral fiasco and financial backlash after this passenger was dragged screaming off a plane. We'll tell you what United is saying now. Okay, so the passenger who was violently dragged from this United Airlines flight, who you hear screaming, is still in the hospital this morning, recovering from his injuries. He told our producer that he is suffering from a broken jaw. Meanwhile, United Airlines CEO is releasing yet another statement. Here to discuss is CNN chief business correspondent Christine Romans and aviation lawyer Thatcher Stone. Thatcher himself was once bumped from a flight and successfully sued over it. And Thatcher, we're going to have you explain to all of us how we can do that at the end of this segment. But first, Christine,
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. What's been the fallout, the financial fallout to United as a result of this?
I mean, near term, a $250 million mistake is what this was. I mean, this was really remarkable here. That's how much market value was lost yesterday.
And their stock plummeted as a result of this.
Their stock plummeted at 4%. Now, it had been worse. It had been $1 billion earlier in the day, and then it came back a little bit as sort of cooler head prevailed. But you could have used some cooler heads to keep this from happening in the first place. The company now has issued a third statement that hits the tone much better.
Okay.
Should have done this in the very beginning. Now the PR part of it, they're on track here.
I have it. Let me read it.
Okay.
The CEO says now in the third statement, the truly horrific event that occurred on this flight has elicited many responses from all of us. Outrage, anger, disappointment. Like you, I continue to be disturbed by what happened on this flight, and I deeply apologize to the customer forcibly removed and to all the customers aboard. No one should ever be mistreated this way. Thatcher, had he started with that, instead of the first statement where he appeared to be calling the passenger belligerent and sort of blaming it on the passenger, would United be in this situation today?
Well, I'm not a stock analyst. I mean, that was the segue into this bit right now. I don't know what would happen to the stock price necessarily.
But in terms of their
look,
PR.
Well, in terms of PR, sure, let's talk about that. Oscar made a mistake if he thought his email that I'm behind you and sort of suggesting belligerence towards the passenger wouldn't be leaked and go viral, particularly with this video. So I think whoever's running PR at the new United Continental Holdings, they need to focus on what the passenger and the public are looking for.
Yeah.
Now, we don't know all the facts about what happened in this instance. And I can get into that, why that's relevant if you'd like.
Well, I want to ask you one thing before that, since you're right, we don't know all of the facts that precipitated that ugly scene that we're seeing play out, but you are an aviation lawyer, and can you just clear up one thing for us? We have learned that the airlines do have the right to ask you to give up your seat, but if you refuse, do they have the right to forcibly remove you?
So that's an interesting question. They certainly have the right to have you removed. And in my opinion, the way this man was removed was rather torrid and unfortunate. But they have the right to remove you. I mean, look, there's a famous clothes manufacturer here in the United States whose niece was so belligerent and nasty on an airplane that they stopped halfway back to the United States, I believe, in Ireland, and threw her off the plane. Was covered in all the news media, and she faced issues in 2 jurisdictions.
Hold on, Thatcher.
So they have the right.
Okay,
so they have the right.
The goal of this, what they should have done is prevented this from happening in the first place. I mean, originally this company said, look, we followed all of the proper procedures. Well, you need to have some diplomacy on the front end. What did the captain say about this? Who was the gate manager? Was there another way they could have resolved this by perhaps offering more money? And again, this wasn't an overbooked flight. There's a lot of being said about how this was an overbooked flight. This was a flight that was totally full, and they suddenly needed to accommodate 4 crew members to get to Louisville to prevent another flight from being. So there was a chain reaction. It should have been prevented before it got
Okay, very quickly, Thatcher, we only have 15 seconds left. How do people sue, as you did successfully, if you're thrown off a flight for overbooking?
Well, they get a good lawyer, and they make sure that the airline has not complied with the rules at 14 CFR 250 that describe what they're supposed to do.
Okay.
It's not clear that United gave this person a written document.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to bone up on 14 3FR 360 and be prepared for next time. Thatcher Stone, Christine Romans, thank you very much. Coming up on New Day in our next hour, we will talk with the JetBlue founder and former CEO David Neeleman about how this PR crisis unfolded. Also at 8 o'clock, we will be joined by New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, who is calling for the federal government to halt airline overbooking as a result. Chris.
All right, a really scary moment in professional soccer, a possible bus attack. Did you hear about this? German police say a bus carrying the professional soccer team Dortmund in Germany was attacked with explosives as the team was traveling to their stadium. Coy Wire has details in the Bleacher Report. What do we know, my friend?
Here's what we know. Chris will zip you through it. 4 explosive devices, 3 went off, 1 was not detonated. There were no arrests, but investigators found a handwritten letter claiming responsibility. And on these blasts, shattered windows rattled the buses. There were no fatalities, but one player, 26-year-old Mark Barta, had to have surgery treating a broken forearm. Debris was lodged in his hand. He is expected to be okay. And while attacks like this are brought about by the worst in those responsible, they can bring out the very best in others. Listen to this. Members of the Dortmund community reached out to Monaco fans who had traveled all the way to the match by tweeting #BedsForAway fans. They opened their homes and shared spare beds for the out-of-town fans who now had an unexpected stay in Dortmund. That's good stuff. A little levity for your morning. Only Tuesday, but it felt more like Catterday at Marlins home opener. The game put on pause, if you will. This little cat trying to take a cat nap out in the warning track. And of all days, yesterday was National Pet Day. Players, security guards trying to hunt this one down. You've heard of fastballs. How about hairballs? You've heard of outfielders. How about Garfielders? This cat just went climbing all over the stadium. Everyone had a little fun with that. Marlins did beat the Braves 8-4, Allison.
That pun salad you just threw at us was fantastic. It was cat-tastic. Thank you very much for that, Coy. Okay, there are some new developments to tell you about this morning about the former Trump advisor Carter Page. A new report says the FBI convinced a judge to issue a warrant based on info that Page was an agent of the Russians. We have that new reporting next.
All right, we have an update on the reporting of hype versus fact in the Russian interference investigation. President Trump claims he or his team were wrongly surveilled by the Obama administration. There is zero proof of that. He says proof will come out that Susan Rice committed a crime. Instead, GOP lawmakers say they reviewed the relevant confidential documents with Rice in the unmasking and that they show no proof that Rice did anything wrong. And now the Washington Post is reporting the FBI got a warrant to monitor former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. That means a judge found probable cause to believe Page was knowingly engaged in clandestine intelligence work on behalf of Russia. Let's discuss CNN counterterrorism analyst and former CIA counterterrorism official Phil Mudd and CNN national security analyst and retired CIA chief of Russia operations Steve Hall. So, Phil, not only is there no proof that Trump and or his team were wrongly caught up in surveillance, but there is real proof that there was a warrant that a judge gave because one of his advisors was up to no good, according to the FBI suspicion.
That's right. Watch this, because what you're going to see Carter Page say, I believe, and he's already started to say this is a political witch hunt. But let me tell you how this game worked, Chris. You got 2 basic pieces. First, the FBI and the Department of Justice are not going to go to the FISA court. That's the special court that allows the FBI to eavesdrop on American citizens without a high degree of confidence that something ugly is going on here. Second, I've talked to that court. These are federal judges. A federal judge is not going to issue a warrant against a political individual involved in a campaign without not necessarily proof, but some, as you say, probable cause that individual is breaking a federal law. So there's going to be a lot of shucking and jiving over the next couple days about whether this is a witch hunt. But having been at the Bureau and been in front of that FISA court, let me tell you, they got some proof here that's going to be ugly. And around Carter Page, it's going from a simmer to a boil. That dude's got to be nervous.
Steve Hall, let's talk about one of the reasons that Carter Page might get some effectiveness out of a ploy like that, because the intel community has been getting trashed for months. And to be honest, Donald Trump as a candidate and as a president has motivated a lot of that. How is that coming home to roost now in terms of what we're seeing in Syria, what's going on with the investigations at home, and the need for people to believe in the integrity of the IC?
Well, I think that President Trump obviously got off to a very difficult start, right at the beginning of the administration and prior to the inauguration, actually, by, referring to the intelligence community and the CIA as, Nazis and that sort of thing. But that said, this is a group of professionals that lives, through the ups and downs of different administrations. Granted, this one's a little different. But these folks are professionals that understand that the key piece of this is making sure that policymakers have the information and the intelligence that they need. But I agree with Phil with regard to Carter Page. This has all the hallmarks of a classic Russian human intelligence operation, where the Russian intelligence services simply look for somebody, cast a wide net as to somebody who might end up being in a position of power, or more importantly, close to power in the United States, and then tries to make contact and recruit that person. And that's what this is beginning to look like. We're not there yet. We have to see more information, which is why there's an investigation going on. But this is the kind of thing that looks like what's happening with Carter Page.
Steve, quick take on Russia's move to completely delegitimize what happened in Syria. Says that they have different, Putin himself says that they have different explanations for what happened other than what the United States and the allies have found, that this was an obvious chemical attack by Assad on his own people.
Well, this is all classic Russian, misdirection and trying to change the topic. I mean, the particularly rich part of this was, I think, Sergei Lavrov saying this morning or recently, that this is an illegal. The cruise missile attack was somehow illegal on the part of the United States. This from a country that just annexed an entire region of a neighboring country. We're talking about Crimea. So this is, the Russians are simply coming at this from a completely different perspective than we are. And to think, as this administration apparently does, that they can sort of tell Russia, hey, you're on the wrong side of history here. You need to come over to our side, to the European side. That's just not how the Russians think. And the Russians think that the West and the United States are quaint when we try to make arguments like that.
Phil, I respect Steve Hall, and you've done the same thing, kind of offering this coda that, hey, no matter what, the intel people are professionals, they'll do their job. But isn't there a risk of erosion when the President of the United States says, Jim Comey, he saved Hillary Clinton's life. Everybody knew she was guilty of all those charges, and he let her go. Susan Rice, oh, there's proof of a crime. It's going to come out. Surveillance, they were all over me. It's terrible. He says things like this. People believe him, and time after time, it's just bogus. Doesn't that create a tension that erodes confidence?
I think over time there's the potential for that. What I'd be watching in the coming weeks and months, Chris, is whether there's an air gap between what the White House says about intelligence and what the CIA people are saying. But a couple of things have happened in the past month or so. Number one, you have a bread and butter piece of intelligence analysis. A bomb went into a Syrian military facility. The intel guys, since the beginning of time, have the responsibility to do the assessment of the damage from that bomb and what the Russians knew. The guys that I worked with have been there since the Reagan era. This is what they've done for 30 years. But let me take inside for one thing. Mike Pompeo was there, and they respect him. So I think that changed the dynamic as well, the new CIA director.
Phil, Steve, thank you for the insight. Appreciate it as always. And thank you, our international viewers. For you, CNN Newsroom is next. For our U.S. viewers, we have new reporting on the Russian interference investigation. Let's get after it.
Russia must fully honor the commitments it made, and Secretary Tillerson is going to make that clear.
Our meetings today come at an important moment in the relationship.
The international community has watched Russia cover up for Assad for years.
It's very bad for Russia. It's very bad for this world.
Someone as despicable as Hitler, he was not using the gas on his own people the same way that Assad is doing.
You don't compare Hitler to anybody, particularly if you're the White House press secretary.
It was insensitive and inappropriate. For that, I apologize.
Fallout from that ugly scene on board that United Airlines flight.
I don't think apologies are enough.
United Airlines video that almost cost the company $1 billion.
This is New Day with Chris Cuomo and Alison Camerata.
Good morning and welcome to your new day. We begin with breaking news. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson meeting with his Russian counterpart for about 2+ hours about the crisis in Syria. Russia says the U.S. strikes are a violation of law and discounts what actually happened. The White House is accusing Russia of helping the Assad regime cover up that chemical attack as a result. And Vladimir Putin could meet with Tillerson today.
Also this morning, we have exclusive reporting and developments on President Trump's claims that Susan Rice broke the law unmasking individuals. These are big developments that you want to hear about. And an explosive report about a Trump campaign aide being investigated as a possible Russian agent. The stakes are high on this day 83 of the Trump presidency, and we have it all covered for you. So let's begin with Michelle Kaczynski. She is live in Moscow for us. Michelle.
Hi, Allison. So you have this 2-hour meeting beginning between U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. This is a time for pleasantries, for welcoming, but it was not pleasant. Lavrov going right into it, slamming U.S. strikes on Syria as a violation of international law, something he said should not be repeated. And he took the opportunity because there's still so many high-level positions that have not been filled. Tillerson, for his part, stuck to cordiality, talked about the relationship and this being an opportunity to try to move forward. But also this morning, you have the Russian government slamming U.S. rhetoric as primitive and loudish. You have Russian President Vladimir Putin saying that things have gotten worse in the relationship under President Trump. And we are also hearing from President Trump himself, as well as the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley.
Frankly, Putin is backing a person that's truly an evil person. And I think it's very bad for Russia. I think it's very bad for mankind. It's very bad for this world.
Anything the Russians say at this point, no one's believing it. No one is. I mean, the international community sees this for what it is. The international community has watched Russia cover up for Assad for years.
Tillerson wants to confront Russia over its continued backing of President Assad in Syria, try to get them to rethink, is the word the U.S. has been using, that stance, and also to tell Russia that the U.S. will hold Russia accountable for its actions. So they had this 2-hour-long crucial meeting. They're now in a working lunch, but there are these big gaps in Secretary Tillerson's schedule today. They're not telling us what those are for. There's still a possibility, according to the Kremlin, that Vladimir Putin will meet with Tillerson. Quite a change from a couple of years ago when Putin himself honored Tillerson as a friend of Russia. Look at the message that it's sending now that he hasn't even scheduled that meeting yet. Chris?
Michelle Kaczynski, thank you very much. We have a CNN exclusive report. Claims of wrongful surveillance and unmasking by House Intel Committee Chair Devin Nunes are blown up by GOP lawmakers who looked at the same documents. Remember this?
I was concerned about Americans' identities being either not masked properly or, in fact, being unmasked in intelligence reports.
Question now is, what was he really concerned about? Because multiple sources in both parties tell CNN there is no evidence the Obama administration did anything wrong or illegal, contrary to claims by Nunes and, frankly, President Trump. CNN's Jim Sciutto live in Washington with the exclusive details. Big story.
Well, Chris, it is undermining, contradicting Nunes, and it appears the president, we've spoken to Republican and Democratic lawmakers and aides, and they're casting doubt on claims by Devin Nunes that Obama administration officials improperly requested the names of U.S. individuals that had been redacted in intelligence documents. CNN sources say these lawmakers have now seen the same intelligence documents Nunes reviewed last month, and they tell us, myself and my colleague Manu Raju, they see no evidence that the Obama administration officials did anything out of the ordinary, and this is crucial, or illegal. One congressional source described the request to me as, quote, normal and appropriate.
Okay, but Jim, I mean, what are they telling you and Manu Raju about what are in those documents?
So they're telling us a couple of things. One, no smoking gun, absolutely no smoking gun. One person we spoke with is even urging the White House to declassify them, make them public, to make it clear that there is nothing alarming in them. A lot of questions have been specified around Susan Rice in particular, whether she acted legally in requesting the names specifically of Trump officials who were incidentally collected in intelligence reports. President Trump, you'll remember, has said he believes she may have broken the law. But again, multiple sources, they've looked at the underlying documents behind these requests that Nunes saw, the same ones, and they say they flatly don't back up the president's claims that she's broken the law and that these are routine requests. And now the president has not revealed what intelligence he's relying on to make his assertion, whether it's different from Nunes, but based on what they've seen, they don't see anything to back that up.
All right, so what do we know about what the rules are for actually making and dealing with unmasking and getting them granted?
Well, this is the thing, because this is an open question. It's a legitimate question. These rules, they're set by the intelligence community. Certain national security officials can make such requests, and then the intelligence agencies, principally the NSA in this case, they then decide whether to grant those requests. And you can see why senior national security officials would want to know as they're reading these classified intelligence reports. Well, who were these Russian officials talking about specifically? That's a reasonable question. But there's also a reasonable question. I've spoken to a number of lawmakers who say, okay, well, what are the standards for this? What are the justifications given to unmask these documents? And while these lawmakers tell me they don't see any evidence here of wrongdoing, they do want to at least look at these practices to make sure that when those requests come, when U.S. Citizens are unmasked, their identities revealed, that there's a reason for it. So some folks in Congress still asking that kind of question, they want answers.
All right, appreciate it, Jim. Do me a favor, stick around. Let's discuss your reporting and this other big story this morning. The Washington Post says the FBI obtained a warrant to monitor the communications of former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page because a judge found probable cause to believe Page was acting as an agent of the Russian government. All right, let's discuss all this. Let's keep Jim Sciutto. As I said, let's bring in General Wesley Clark. He's the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander and a senior fellow at UCLA's Burkle Center for International Relations. And we have Chris Cillizza, a reporter and editor-at-large at CNN Politics. General, there is a lot of intrigue with Russia. We have the Russian interference investigation we're talking about here. We have what's going on abroad. You've spent a lot of time in that world and dealing with the Russians. The idea that we have our Secretary of State there right now saying, how do we mend our differences? And the Russian take is, you can never do what you just did again. It was wrong. And we dispute that anything wrong was done by Assad. How do you move from there?
Well, it's a good question. But first of all, I think it's a good thing that Rex Tillerson is there, because I think you do have to have that open dialogue. The problem is that when you lay out your position so clearly before you go in, like you say, we're going to hold Russia accountable and so forth, and then when you come out, people say, well, did you hold them accountable? And what did you get done? So it's always a little tricky with diplomacy like this, because you're not going to have a clear-cut outcome on this. Russia's not going to back off. Russia's deeply embedded with Iran. And this is from the time of the czars. There was always a desire to get through Iran into the Persian Gulf, and especially with oil. For 100 years, Russia's tried to get into Iran and get oil and get a warm water port down there. And Putin's done it better than any previous Russian leader or Soviet leader has done it. He's not about to leave. Iran won't let him pull out of Syria, and Iran won't pull out of Syria. So where are we going with the policy? That's the question. But we're not going to find out. We're not going to move the policy until the administration plays, touch and bump with the Russians face-to-face on this and gets a feel for exactly how they're going to respond. So I think we're going to be in a period of suspended animation right now. I was glad to see that Jim Mattis yesterday in his press conference didn't commit us to further strikes in Syria, because that's a black hole when you go down there if you don't have an end state in mind. Now, we could create an end state, but you can't create a viable end state unless you bring the American people on board. Yeah. And my reading of it is people don't want their sons and daughters in another big war in the Middle East. Yeah. So the administration has a lot less maneuver room on this issue than it thinks it does.
So, Chris, the meeting, we now are told, with Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, and Rex Tillerson has wrapped up. It lasted about 2 hours and 15 minutes. And in the meantime, Vladimir Putin has spoken out about this. And it sounds like what's happened to the U.S.-Russia relations in, just a week's time, that they have gone from suspended animation to deterioration. Here is what Vladimir Putin just said. The working level of confidence in Russian-American relations, especially at the military level, under the administration of Donald Trump has not improved, but rather worsened. Stronger words than we have heard yet from President Trump about Putin.
Yeah, look, General Clark is right. Vladimir Putin is not going to back down here. Russia feels as though it's in a strong negotiating position. I would say, Allison, I'm fascinated to see how Donald Trump responds to both the statement you just read from Putin and Lavrov's treatment of Rex Tillerson. Remember, Donald Trump's campaign was premised on the idea that sort of we're not tough enough in the world. People are not afraid of us anymore. We've become a weaker nation than we once were. I'm interested to see how sort of being talked to like that, face-to-face and via statement, is reacted to by Donald Trump. Because this is not someone who usually takes threats and tough talk lying down. He usually, candidly, takes to Twitter to respond to these things, but he almost always responds, right? He usually does not let these things go unanswered. So diplomacy, as the general points out, is a delicate thing. I'm sure there are plenty of people within the White House saying, let's just, they're posturing. Let's wait and see. Let's not draw too many conclusions. But Donald Trump is not a wait and see guy. So I don't know if he will wait and see.
Although it is interesting to the point about the president's tweeting, how little he has tweeted about Syria, his thinking about the plan there, what's going on. Now, Jim, let's bounce to the Russian investigation for a second. Not only do we have your new reporting, but so the premise that, well, there was all this wrongful activity going on that was directed at Trump, no proof of that. But there is, according to the Washington Post, proof that there was rightful surveillance activity going on of a Trump advisor, Carter Page. What do you make of that FISA warrant?
Listen, FISA warrants not handed out like candy. A very high standard for these for one, for the FBI to seek them, and two, for the FISA court to grant them. They needed probable cause here, and they apparently believe they had probable cause that Carter Page, who was identified by President Trump himself as one of his close national security advisors, might have been working as an agent of a foreign government. I mean, just listen to that phrase there, foreign agent, someone advising the presidential candidate at the time, Donald Trump. Since then, of course, Trump and his advisors have distanced themselves, said that he was low level, etc. Regardless, this is an important step in the FBI investigation of possible ties between Trump or possible collusion between Trump advisors and Russians as they interfered in the election. Doesn't mean they're going to find it, but they at least had enough evidence to pursue a warrant to investigate further, and that is a significant step.
And Jim, one more time, your new exclusive reporting this morning, you have sources, both Democratic and Republican, on the House and Senate Intel committees that have now seen the very same documents that raised so much alarm with Devin Nunes that he had to run to the White House to alert them. And they say that there is no evidence of Susan Rice having done anything illegal. President Trump just spoke about this on Fox Business Network, and he talks one more time about his wiretapping claims. Let's play that.
When you look at the extent of the surveillance, me and so many other people, it's terrible.
She said she didn't do it for political reasons. Susan Rice told
Does anybody really believe that? Nobody believes that. Even the people that try to protect her in the news media. It's such a big story, and I'm sure it will continue forward. But what they did is horrible.
Jim, what they did is horrible. Is that what your sources say?
Listen, it's a glib defense we've heard often from the president, that this is people in the news media trying to protect Susan Rice. Let's look at the facts. We and my colleague Mano Raja and I, we spoke to Democratic and Republican lawmakers, senators and congressmen and women on the Senate and House Intelligence Committees who have reviewed the documents that were the basis of Devin Nunes' claims, and it seems the president's own claims. They reviewed the documents at the NSA, and they said nothing illegal, nothing improper. Those are the facts. And we spoke to people from both parties to get greater confidence. There's just nothing we've seen yet, and nothing they've seen, the people with the security clearances to see it, to back up the president's claim.
Yeah, look, it's an uncomfortable position, but it has to be said, Jim, though. You got to make the points that you're making, because Yes, he's the President of the United States, but he is held to the same standard of truth as everybody else, and he has had nothing to show for his allegations to point.
No.
Chris Salissa, go ahead. I wanted to ask you about Sean Spicer, so make a point first.
Yeah, just very quickly to just bolster Jim's point on this is not a he said conversation, and I think it's important to remember that this is a federal court saying yes, there is enough information here that we are willing to grant a wiretap on Carter Page, and this is senators and lawmakers saying we didn't see what Devin Nunes said. Add that to the fact that you have James Comey, Jim Clapper, Nunes himself saying Trump Tower wasn't wiretapped. So on the one hand, you have Donald Trump saying, well, Susan Rice broke the law. Well, of course I was wiretapped. Well, everyone was surveilled. On the other hand, you have lots of people, credible, serious people who are not partisans necessarily, some are Democrats, some are not, saying this is not accurate. And that scale doesn't balance out at the moment. So
wrong and then owns it. Sean Spicer said something that was wrong and hurtful, comparing Assad to Hitler and the Holocaust and what happened with chemical weapons there. Here's what he said, and here's how he apologized.
You know, you had someone as despicable as Hitler, who didn't even sink to using chemical weapons. Frankly, I mistakenly used an inappropriate and insensitive reference to the Holocaust, for which, frankly, there is no comparison. And for that, I apologize. It was a mistake to do that.
All right, look, he owned the apology. You got to give him credit for that. This is very hurtful, let alone during Passover that this came up. But Chris, let me ask you this. Is this just about a screw-up, a blunder, as he called it during his interview with Wolf, or is this a pattern of just not getting it? Remember the Holocaust remembrance statement that the White House put out?
Yep.
Remember Trump Jr. saying, hey, if they did this to the other side, boy, the gas chambers would be fired up. That kind of insensitivity. Spicer called them Holocaust centers in his statement yesterday instead of gas chamber. Is this about just not getting it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to give Sean the benefit of the doubt that he got himself into a verbal trap and couldn't get himself out. Not that this is reflective of any sort of broader theory of anything. That said, press secretaryism 101 or public speaking 101 says if you start a sentence, this is a lot like Hitler, you should stop the sentence, right? I mean, it will never work out well for you. I think the problem for Sean is that that marked the second day in a row where he had a unforced error that caused some bad press for this White House the day before, obviously saying that, well, if barrel bombs are dropped, then we're going to respond. Questions of whether that was drawing a new line or setting a new policy as it related to Syria. So, yeah, I mean, I think he is not in a good place right now, and we know that he is not someone that Donald Trump has been in love with from the start.
Yeah. Panel, we wish we could talk to you much more, but we have so much news this morning we have to wrap it up. Thanks to all of you for being here. Meanwhile, President Trump says the U.S. is not going into Syria. So what is his next move? Why, Tom Friedman, New York Times columnist, says defeating ISIS in Syria should not be the U.S.'s next move. He's next. In a new interview, President Trump is talking about Syria for the first time since those U.S. strikes on Syria. He is blaming the Obama administration.
We're not going into Syria, but when I see people using horrible, horrible chemical weapons, which they agreed not to use under the Obama administration, but they violated it, what I did should have been done by the Obama administration a long time before I did it. And you would have had a much better, I think Syria would be a lot better off right now than it has been.
Remember, this is the same man who told President Obama not to go into Syria, that it was a mistake, after a chemical attack that was equal to and worse as the one that we just had.
Okay, so let's discuss all of that with New York Times columnist and best-selling author Thomas Friedman. He's the author of Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist's Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. Tom, great to have you here this morning.
Great to be with you guys.
In the aftermath of the U.S. missile strikes on Syria, what do you see as the Trump doctrine or policy?
Allison, I don't think there's a Trump doctrine or policy. In all fairness, I really can't blame them for not having figured out Syria. It's incredibly complicated. But in terms of what the president ordered, this air Tomahawk missile attack in response to the use of poison gas there, you know, I look at it, Allison, really at sort of three levels. On the one hand, I happen to agree with that it reduces the chance that someone else around the world or in Syria will again use poison gas. Doesn't eliminate it, but it reduces it, and that's an American strategic interest. We don't want to see poison gas reintroduced into battlefields. Second, it does increase the uncertainty around the world to other bad actors, whether it's Russia, Iran, or more importantly, North Korea, about what this administration will do, and keeping them off balance is a good thing. What that attack doesn't do is increase our leverage in Syria on the ground to really forge the kind of political settlement, the kind of power sharing agreement between Assad and the predominantly Sunni Muslim rebels there. And that's always been the problem. You know, you said in the segment before, someone made the point that the American people simply do not want to be involved on the ground in Syria now. They do not want to be involved in a fight there. And so the dilemma for the previous administration and this one is, how do you get any leverage? Because negotiating without leverage in the Middle East is like really stupid when you're actually not ready to introduce any forces of your own on the ground.
Tom, let me ask you something. This assumption that, hey, it's right to draw the line at chemical weapons. We don't want those. You know, Tillerson had a good line the other day. He said, you know, it doesn't matter to the dead. Why not punish all of these types of efforts against innocents, against non-combatants, the same way? I mean, that's the problem in not just Syria, but in many of these oppressive instigations we see around the world. Why make it just about chemical weapons? So if he drops a barrel bomb, if he just goes in there and shoots up hundreds of people, that's okay?
Sure, Chris. You know, it's obviously contradictory, and there's no simple answer for it. You have to draw a red line somewhere. The problem with saying we're going to interdict any effort to harm civilians in Syria anywhere is that will very quickly take you into direct combat on the ground in that country. So if you're not ready to go there, you've got to draw a line, and that's the line they drew.
You know, Tom, you have a new column out this morning that I want to just read to people about what you're hoping for from President Trump in light of all of this. You say it's time for Trump to be Trump. Utterly cynical and unpredictable. Trump should want to defeat ISIS in Iraq, but in Syria, not for free, not now. In Syria, Trump should let ISIS be Assad's, Iran's, Hezbollah's, and Russia's headache. That is quite different from what the administration says their goal is in Syria, which is defeat ISIS.
Well, you know, Allison, really for reasons of the question, you know, Chris raised all these complexities, they've sort of retreated to this, what they think is a safe harbor. Well, what we're going to focus on in Syria is the consensus position of defeating ISIS. And what I was trying to say in that column is, well, two things. One is why would you defeat ISIS in Syria when you know that you would be turning the territory over to the Assad regime? Or you don't have Sunnis good Sunnis, decent Sunnis, able to hold that territory if we defeated ISIS. And why take the pressure off Assad and the Russians now? You know, as I said in that column, when was the last time Donald Trump did anything for free? Well, it would be like him cleaning up a toxic waste dump for free next to a golf course he wants to buy before he's even negotiated for the golf course. So I think we've kind of retreated into this position of we can all agree on defeating ISIS, but I think we should use ISIS there as a source of leverage. You're going to keep coming back to that word on Assad, the Russians, and Hezbollah.
Tom, let me get your take on this. It's not a heavy headline this morning, but it seems to be instructive. You got Tillerson over in Moscow trying to draw a straighter line about what we'll tolerate and what we won't as a U.S. interest. But then he's at the G7 just before that in Italy, and he says, in somewhat of an offhanded comment, why would U.S. taxpayers be interested in Ukraine when obviously the G7 were very interested in trying to police what Russia has done there? What do you make of that?
You know, Chris, when you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. And you don't have a sense with Tillerson or this administration in general of a set of core beliefs. And what have been the traditional core beliefs? And they're beliefs that I really subscribe to. And that is that the European Union Western Europe. It's the other United States in the world. It's the United States of Europe. It's the other great center of democracy, liberal ideas, and free markets. And I'm a big believer that two United States are better than one. Ukraine is not in the European Union, but in what Putin was trying to do in going into Ukraine was prevent it from getting closer to the European Union, prevent it from becoming a model of democracy, liberalism, and free markets that the Russian people might look. And so what you don't sense with these people is any commitment to core beliefs, traditional core beliefs. And I would not, the European Union, Chris, it's the most boring institution in the world. I once did a column about it, and just to fool the search engine, I called it Trump's European Union, just so people would read it, okay? But the European Union is the other United States in the world. It's our wingman in the world. And if it is weakened, which is Putin's direct objective, we are weakened.
Trump spokesman Tom Friedman. No, just kidding. Thank you very much, Tom. We always appreciate getting your perspective.
Great to be with you guys.
So United Airlines is, of course, still reeling from that flight fiasco. After this video of a man being dragged from his seat screaming, what is the airline doing today to turn things around? We have this.